What is up? This video is about struggling with conflict or conversations that really are there to resolve conflict. Often these conversations are full of emotions. They can be high tension. They can be the ones that are the most uncomfortable because you might not be able to see the way out of it from the forefront. You really got to get into it to figure it out. Unless you're directly involved in the conflict, which then it might be a little bit clearer. Ultimately, what I have here is 3 of the ways that I've pivoted the way that I handle conflict and the way that I handle conversations regarding or trying to get through or improve and handle and manage conflict. This comes up primarily because I've had a lot of conflict within my business the past couple weeks. As it grows, there's more people. With more people, there's a little bit more volatility, a little bit more banging of heads from day to day and over time. So it's something that I've had a lot of experience with recently and in the past 3 years, managing this facility and growing it up about 100%. I think that these probably extend. I utilize these tactics in pretty much every conversation I have with any sort of conflict relative to it. And I think that it's helped me manage and get through them. I don't always get the outcome I want, but ultimately I believe that the process is pretty good. So the first of which, I think it's typical or it's standard to almost attack the idea or attack the opinions or feelings or whatever it is the one side is presenting, the argument they're presenting. And this is a fundamental thing. We want to argue. And so in an argument, sometimes we either clash our ideas and clash our perspectives and clash our emotions, or we might attack their emotions and attack their perspectives and attack their ideas. And this is going to come up really big in the second point, but this is what I'd like you to try instead. Think about it. This is the way that I think about it that makes the most sense. I want to allow the other person to put all of their ideas and all their emotions and all their perspectives and what they think about the situation, and I want them to have room for that on the table. And then I want to take and have room for mine on the table. It should be big enough for all of us, for everything that we need to talk about. And ultimately, the first thing that I want to do is try to understand and confirm everything that it is that they're saying and feeling and their perspectives. Make sure that I understand it. And ultimately, I will be seeking that and seeking a level of validation and understanding on their side as well. So one of the ways that I like to confirm it is by repeating it back, saying, or labeling is a term that I've heard or that I picked up from Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. It's a great book about negotiation, and labeling is a tactic in which you try to apply a label that helps you connect with the other person. That sounds like, it looks like, it seems like. It seems like you're really upset about this particular issue. Is that right? Or it sounds like you're really upset because this happened, or because I did this, or because she did this. These things really help you connect with an individual and help to convey a level of understanding. And when you demonstrate that you are seeing and hearing the individual and their thoughts and their feelings and their perspectives, it really reinforces and becomes a comfort to the person. Think about the times in which you feel seen and understood and heard. Unfortunately, they're incredibly rare. So when you can extend those opportunities, especially in times of conflict, it can help ease the tension. It's incredibly helpful. So moving into the second one, oftentimes the goal is to be right. It is an argument, and it's something that we want to win. So what I recommend trying instead is the goal is to understand and reach a common ground. The goal is to hear one another, so to actually listen and to understand one another. And this is incredibly powerful. It's taking the time to have the full conversation, not rushing through the conversation. It's really trying to get to the bottom of it. Let me take a look at my notes here. So this is an extension of the first point, but it's ultimately something that you can rely on as you go through this conversation, in taking the proper time, in listening with the right level of focus, in not taking things personally and not succumbing to attacks. You need to maintain control of the conversation, especially conflicts. There's a lot of emotions involved, which I'll touch on in just a minute. If you go in with the goal to be right, it becomes an argument, it becomes a fight, it becomes a contest. Additionally, it can lead you to attack their points and attack their emotions and try to invalidate what they're feeling. This is just going to add to the conflict or create further conflict that didn't exist before. Do not do that. It's the worst thing that you can do. And maintaining control is incredibly powerful in conflict resolution. So the last bit, in alignment with these two, is the issue or the problem would be adding emotions when there's no room for it. I like to think of this as a glass that's full. It's filled all the way to the top with water. And then you go to add more water, and what happens? It spills and it makes a mess. This is what happens sometimes when you're in a conversation. It's high tension, filled with emotions. There's no room for yours. So you shouldn't be adding them. The most helpful thing you can do is to remain calm and in control. One of the ways that I definitely recommend to do that is to think back about the advice above. Think about creating space. Have I allowed them to make all their points? Have I allowed them to get all their emotions out of the table? Have I worked to understand them, and do I understand them? And if at any point, if I lose understanding, I need to get back there. I cannot lose that. That's got to be a fundamental part of it. And am I trying to fight and win? Am I trying to argue and win? Am I trying to contest and win? Or am I trying to hear and understand? We need space for both of these things, because at the end of the day, maybe we won't end up on the same page, but we can understand one another. And that is the biggest thing that I've taken away from a lot of conflict conversations. Honestly, you don't have to end up on the same side. You just have to understand each side, understand each other's perspectives. And if they feel seen and heard, oftentimes they can leave satisfied with the conversation, even if they didn't get what they wanted. And even if you don't get what you want, it's something to come to terms with. There's a lot more maturity in the world than you might believe. There's a lot less too, unfortunately, but somehow those things go together. So stay centered on the goal and the space. The goal being to hear and understand. The space being allowing all the room for the other person and everything that they have to say. You can absolutely remain in control. And if they become emotional, they start to attack, don't succumb to that. You can absolutely remain calm. It's a Stoic principle that I think is incredibly helpful, is that events do not control your behavior. It's our reaction to events. And we are in total control of our reaction. So listening as their point is laid out and emotions are poured out with it. This is the most important part. One of the tips that I also think that, as I was working through this, that I was reminded of is Simon Sinek once said, I believe in a podcast most likely, that you can't meet emotion with logic and you can't meet logic with emotion. So these are the kinds of things. When you go into a discussion like this and you're trying to connect with someone, oftentimes if they're incredibly emotional, you can't look at it logically. You have to start looking at it from an emotional perspective, an understanding and empathizing perspective. If it becomes a logical discussion, then you can meet with logic. I found this to be incredibly on point and incredibly useful as well. So to sum these three things up, let's remember that oftentimes what we do is we try to argue. And in trying to argue, we try to be right. And arguing is attacking one another. Arguing is fighting each other's points instead of allowing space and trying to hear and understand and validate their points, their perspective, and you trying to accomplish that same goal. We're trying to be right. And then we often add emotions into it, into a space that doesn't have room for it, making a mess of it all. So these are my 3 swaps that I have for handling conversations regarding conflict. Ultimately, just handling conflict resolution. It's incredibly interesting how many times I've had very emotionally tense and high tension conversations. And I remain calm. I remain centered on the goal of trying to hear and understand and allowing them the space to get everything they need to get out. So that way, then we can start to work towards a resolution. We can work towards common ground, and we can work towards an agreement, which doesn't mean one side wins and the other loses. But it means that we understand one another and we can move forward. We can move forward in a civil manner. That's ultimately the goal. We better understand one another, our relationships reinforced or improved, and the conflict is reduced or eliminated because of understanding. Try it out, see if it works for you. You can't lose if you don't quit.